The aroma of roasted chicken and baked macaroni filled the modest two-bedroom apartment. Tessa moved quickly between the stove and the dining table, checking on the cornbread, smoothing down the tablecloth, and straightening the stack of wrapped gifts she'd prepared. Nothing big, just little tokens she knew Eli liked. His favorite lemon soda stood chilled in a glass with ice, waiting. She glanced at the clock. 7:13 p.m. He said he'd arrive by 7. On the couch lay a photo frame she had pulled from the shelf earlier, a picture of Eli at age 6, missing front teeth, hugging her leg tightly while she knelt behind him, arms wrapped around his shoulders. Her eyes lingered on that memory, her smile soft, full of quiet exhaustion and pride. A key jiggled at the door. Her heart leapt. She rushed to the hallway, smoothing her hair. The door opened. Eli stepped in, but something was off. He didn't smile. No, worse, he didn't even make eye contact. His once animated face was closed, unreadable. Behind him stood a woman Tessa hadn't seen in over a decade. Janet. Aunt Janet. Tessa froze, her hands still holding the edge of the doorframe. Her smile faltered. "Hi, baby," she said softly, stepping forward, arms slightly open. Eli walked in, brushing past her barely with a pat on the shoulder. "Hey," he mumbled, looking around like he didn't recognize the place. Janet followed with a smug nod. "Long time, Tessa." Tessa's chest tightened. What are you doing here?" Eli turned, standing in the center of the living room she'd decorated just for him, and said it, calm, directer, like it had been rehearsed. "You're not my mother, Tessa. You don't own me. Aunt Janet says I should have had a real family, not be raised like some charity case." The words landed like a slap. Tessa blinked. The air seemed to thin around her. Her heart pounded, but her limbs felt frozen. She looked at him, trying to read his face, waiting for the punchline, a laugh, a sign this was a joke, a test. But there was nothing, no emotion, just a dull emptiness in Eli's eyes as he dropped his bag by the wall. She glanced at Janet, who simply raised an eyebrow, unbothered. Tessa took a small step back. Eli, I raised you. I was 17 when Mom and Dad died. I gave up everything for you. You chose that," Eli said, his tone sharp. "Doesn't mean I owe you my life for it." He walked past her again, this time into the kitchen, where he glanced at the table, the food untouched, the balloons gently swaying in the air. He didn't say a word. Tessa stood in the hallway, arms limp by her sides, watching the boy she had sacrificed everything for drift into the house like a stranger, dragging behind him the very woman who abandoned them both when they were children. The warmth of the evening evaporated. Something had shifted, something sacred had cracked, and she didn't know if it could ever be made whole again. The sky was grey the day they buried their parents. 17-year-old Tessa stood beside the caskets, her arm around 5-year-old Eli, who clutched a stuffed bear to his chest and didn't understand why everyone kept crying. Her face was blank, numb from shock, and her hands trembled as the preacher spoke. Janet, their only living relative, sat in the back row, silent and unreadable, not offering a word to either of them. 3 days later, Tessa stood in a cold courtroom, her voice firm despite the ache in her throat. "They're all I have, Your Honor. He's all I have. I can do this. I will do this." The judge hesitated. The state was ready to place Eli in foster care. After all, what could a 17-year-old girl possibly offer a child? But Tessa fought. She brought in school counselors, her part-time boss from the diner, even their church pastor to vouch for her. She promised to finish high school at night. She promised to work and parent and never let Eli feel alone. They gave her temporary custody. She made it permanent a year later. Tessa worked 6 days a week at a local diner, waitressing through double shifts with aching feet. At night, she studied with a worn-out notebook and fading highlighters at the kitchen table while Eli slept in the next room. She taught herself to braid his hair, to sew a button back on his shirt, to say no when he asked for things she couldn't afford, but always found a way to give him anyway. There were moments she didn't think she'd make it, but she did. She missed prom, never applied to that out-of-state scholarship, skipped sleep more times than she could count. Her world narrowed to a single mission: raise Eli right, and she did. Years passed. She became a nurse, a good one, competent, quiet, reliable, but her face grew tired. Her eyes held the weight of years she never really got to live. She never dated seriously, always afraid it would take time, or love away from Eli. She never moved out of their childhood home. She decorated his room with college pennants before he even applied. She packed his lunch until senior year. Even now, when she came home after long shifts at the hospital, she still checked her phone for texts from him, still watched his old piano recital videos when she couldn't sleep. Eli was her world, and she thought she was his, until Janet reappeared. No one had seen or heard from her since the funeral. The rumor was she and their parents had fought over money, something about the will. After the burial, she vanished. Not a call, not a letter. Now, after all these years, she was suddenly there, polished, persuasive, full of smiles that didn't reach her eyes. And somehow, she had wormed her way into Eli's life. Tessa first noticed the change months ago. Shorter phone calls, cancelled visits. Eli seemed distracted when he did come home, his tone distant. He asked questions like, "Why didn't we ever move out of this house?" And, "Why didn't you ever ask for help from the family?" At first, Tessa thought it was just him growing up. But now, after tonight, she saw it clearly. Janet had planted something, a lie, a poison, and it was blooming right in front of her. Tessa sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she reread the email. The hospital shift had already drained her, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The email was a routine notification from the family estate attorney, a courtesy update about recent changes in the trust linked to Eli's inheritance. Only, she hadn't authorized any changes. She scrolled again, heart thudding. New co-signer added, Janet Wilkinson. She couldn't breathe. Janet, legally attached to Eli's inheritance account. Eli was only 20. He wasn't supposed to have full control until 25. She had safeguarded that money like a hawk all these years, untouched, waiting for him to use it for med school, a business, a life starter. Not this. She opened the second attachment. Title transfer forms. Pending sale of property. 218 Maple Drive. Her hand flew to her mouth. That was this house, her parents' house. The one she scrubbed with bleach and tears after the accident. The one she worked 2 jobs to keep when the mortgage almost defaulted. The one Eli learned to ride his bike in front of, where he took his first steps, said his first words, laugh, cry. He was selling it and moving in with Janet. Her vision blurred as she grabbed her keys and drove straight to the small off-campus apartment Eli shared with a few friends. She banged on the door, ignored the curious stares of his roommate, and waited until Eli came out of his room, shirt half-tucked, earphones dangling. He blinked. Tessa, what? She held up the printed documents, her voice brittle. You moved your account under Janet's guardianship. You're selling the house. He frowned, visibly annoyed. Why are you snooping into my financial stuff? Because I'm still listed on the estate's communications. I was your guardian, Eli. I raised you, and now you're signing everything over to her without a word to me. He crossed his arms. I didn't need to tell you. Her throat tightened. Why, Eli? Why her? You hated her for abandoning us. She didn't abandon me, he snapped. She says she wanted to help, but you cut her out. She says you only kept me so you could keep the house. Tessa's face fell. What? She told me everything. That you turned down scholarships to stay here so you could claim the house. Not because you loved me. That you made me feel guilty my whole life just so I wouldn't leave. That you controlled everything. My school, my choices, my friends. That you never even tried to have a real life because you didn't want one. You just wanted to be a martyr. Tessa took a shaky breath. That's not true, she said quietly. But he looked at her like he didn't believe her. Like everything she'd done. The meals skipped so he could eat better. The sleepless nights, the years of loneliness, meant nothing now. You're an adult, she whispered. You can make your own choices, but don't rewrite the past to justify this. I'm not rewriting anything, he said. I'm just finally seeing it clearly. And what about me, Eli? She asked, voice cracking. I was a child too. I was 17. I didn't get to be free. I didn't get choices. I gave them all up. For you. He looked away, and that hurt more than anything else. You're selling the only home we ever had, she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. You're choosing the woman who walked away over the one who stayed. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Eli? He didn't answer. She turned to leave, her hand shaking on the doorknob. Her voice came one last time, soft but full of years she could never get back. I didn't just raise you. I loved you. I made you my entire world. I would have died for you. Behind her, Eli stood silent, and that silence said everything. Tessa sat on the edge of her bed, her chest tight, her phone resting like dead weight in her palm. 3 missed calls, 2 ignored texts. Eli hadn't responded in days. She told herself it was school, exams, stress. But she knew something had shifted. And it wasn't just Janet whispering in his ear. It was him choosing to listen. The next blow came in a beige envelope hand-delivered to her door. Tessa slit it open and read the contents slowly, her fingers tightening with each line. Petition to review financial oversight of minor to adult estate, filed by Janet Wilkinson. The language was sterile, legal, cold. Allegations of mismanagement of funds. Request for immediate third-party oversight, Janet. A note stating that Tessa neglected to pursue Eli's full potential by discouraging independence and used emotional leverage to maintain control over financial assets and property. It hit like a gut punch. She couldn't breathe. She had lived paycheck to paycheck for years, all to make sure Eli had everything. She skipped winter coats, didn't fix the heater one brutal February just so he could attend a coding camp in DC, and now she was being painted as a manipulator. She called her hospital supervisor and took 3 days off. Then she drove to Dean Walker's office, the only lawyer in town known for standing up to family disputes like these. Dean was in his early 40s, calm and steel-eyed, with a reputation for cutting through emotion to get results. But even he blinked at the petition. "She's framing you like a leech," he said, after reviewing the documents. "I've seen this kind of play. She wants the house. The inheritance is just the door she's trying to kick open." "She vanished after the funeral," Tessa muttered. "She didn't even send Eli a birthday card." Dean leaned back, thoughtful. "Blood means nothing to people chasing money. You'd be surprised how fast a forgotten relative turns lawyer when they smell property." Tessa swallowed hard. "I need to fight this." Dean nodded. "Then we dig, and we hit first." The next day, Tessa made the hardest decision since that courtroom battle 15 years ago. She drove to Eli's campus. She texted him outside his dorm. "I'm here. I want 5 minutes." Alone. No response. She waited. Then the front door opened, and there he was, with Janet beside him. She looked freshly manicured, wearing sunglasses on a cloudy day and carrying a tote bag that probably cost more than Tessa's monthly groceries. She smiled like a politician. "Tessa," she said sweetly, "you should have called first." "I did," Tessa said, her eyes on Eli. He wouldn't meet her gaze. "I just need 5 minutes," she said, voice trembling. Janet slid her arm around Eli like they were equals. "We're heading out, actually. Maybe next week." "You're an adult, Eli," Tessa said quietly. "You don't need a chaperone to speak to me." "I don't want drama," he said flatly. "I told you already. You've made this about you." "No," Tessa said. "It was never about me. It was always about you." Janet stepped forward, her voice syrupy. "Tessa, if you're struggling emotionally with the transition, there are resources." Tessa turned on her. "You didn't even come to Mom and Dad's funeral. You ran. And now you've run back just in time to collect whatever's left." Eli raised his voice. "Stop it. You think everyone's out to get you. Maybe Janet's the only one who's been honest." Tessa stared at him. Then, slowly, she turned and walked back to her car. The tears didn't fall until she shut the door and drove away. Back home, the walls felt thinner, the silence thicker. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. That night, she opened her laptop. It was time to look into Janet's life. Public records, property registries, civil court databases, and the pieces began to fall together. Wilkinson Properties LLC, dissolved for insolvency, 3 foreclosures, 2 pending civil suits in Georgia and South Carolina, 1 for breach of contract, 1 for unpaid business loans. She read for hours, her heart pounding. Janet was broke, drowning. She had no stable assets, no home of her own, and now she was reaching for the only thing that had value, Tessa's. She printed every document, every court file, every property listing. Dean would need it all. The next morning, she dragged herself into her shift at the hospital. Her co-worker Derek noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the tremble in her hands. "You okay?" he asked gently, handing her a fresh coffee. She gave a tight smile. "No." He sat beside her in the break room, silent at first. Then he said, "You're not the kind of person who quits." She looked at him, surprised. "I've seen you come in here on 2 hours of sleep," he said. "You stayed late when that kid coded in ER. You worked the floor when 3 nurses called out sick. You raised your brother when you were still a kid. That's not weak. That's not controlling. That's strength." The courtroom was silent, except for the soft rustle of papers and the occasional creak of leather chairs. Tessa sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clenched together in her lap. Across from her, Janet sat poised and smug, dressed in a tailored navy suit that screamed borrowed confidence. Beside her, Eli looked like a stranger in a suit 2 sizes too big for his shoulders, his face unreadable. Dean leaned close to Tessa and whispered, "Stay steady. Let them go first." Janet took the stand first. She spoke with the polished calm of someone used to performing. It became clear to me that Tessa was emotionally unfit to manage Eli's estate. I found discrepancies in the account, purchases that didn't benefit Eli, money shifted without proper documentation. She clicked her tongue. I only intervened because I love my nephew. Tessa kept her face still, but her jaw ached from the pressure of holding it all in. Next, the lawyer for Janet submitted falsified bank statements. Dean objected twice, and both times was overruled until full analysis could be reviewed. Then Eli took the stand. Dean didn't look at Tessa when the judge called his name. Eli Raymond. He walked slowly, deliberately, like someone playing a role he wasn't sure he wanted. When he sat, he looked at the judge, and not once at Tessa. "Do you feel that Tessa has managed your inheritance in your best interest?" the attorney asked. Eli's voice was cold. "I don't know. I used to think so, but now I feel like she used it to keep me dependent, to control my life." "And how did that affect your sense of independence?" "I don't think I ever had one. Janet showed me that." A sharp gasp came from somewhere in the room. Tessa thought it might have been her own breath catching in her throat. Dean stood next. "Did you know that Tessa worked 2 jobs while finishing high school so you wouldn't be placed in foster care?" "I didn't ask her to do that." "Did you know she turned down a full scholarship to stay close to you?" Eli hesitated. "That was her choice." Dean let the silence stretch. Then, quietly, he submitted a second batch of bank records into evidence. "We'd like to present newly acquired financial logs from the joint account. Eli Raymond recently moved under Janet Wilkinson's guardianship. You'll find several large withdrawals made over the course of 3 months, all authorized under forged signatures." The courtroom stirred. Dean continued. "These funds were not used for Eli's benefit. They were redirected into accounts belonging to businesses under Janet Wilkinson's name. We've included notarized statements from bank employees who were pressured into allowing these transactions under Janet's authority." Janet went rigid. Her lawyer stood to object, but the judge raised a hand. "I'll allow it. Continue." Dean walked over to Tessa. "We'd also like to call Tessa Raymond to the stand." She stood slowly, her knees stiff, but her voice, when it came, was clear, unpolished, real. "I didn't raise Eli to owe me anything," she said quietly. "I didn't sacrifice so he'd be grateful. I did it because he's my brother, because when our parents died, he was all I had left, and I didn't want him to grow up feeling like he didn't matter." Her hands trembled in her lap. "If I made mistakes, it wasn't out of greed. It was fear, that I'd lose him, that I wasn't enough. But I always tried to do right by him. I skipped meals so he could have 3. I sold our mother's jewelry so he wouldn't have to give up on his textbooks. I slept on the couch so he could have the bigger bedroom to study." Her voice cracked. "And if all that makes me the villain in his story now, so be it. I'll live with his anger. But I won't sit here and let someone who disappeared for 15 years rewrite the truth of who raised him." She looked directly at Eli, her eyes full, but not pleading, not desperate, just honest. "I didn't need him to love me back. I just needed him safe." For the first time, Eli looked up, and for a split second something shifted in his face. A tremor of guilt, of doubt. The judge leaned forward. "This court finds the evidence submitted by the plaintiff to be credible. Janet Wilkinson is hereby removed from all oversight of Eli Raymond's estate pending a full investigation into potential financial misconduct. Control of the estate remains with Tessa Raymond, as previously arranged." A flurry of movement followed. Janet turned to her lawyer, whispering urgently. Eli sat frozen, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Dean patted Tessa's hand, but she couldn't feel the victory. Not really. Outside the courtroom, Tessa stepped into the afternoon sun. Derek was waiting near the courthouse doors, offering her a quiet nod. Eli stepped out moments later. He paused, 20 feet away. Their eyes met. He opened his mouth, maybe to speak, maybe to say thank you, or I'm sorry, or nothing at all. But whatever it was, he turned and walked the other way. The house was quiet again. Not the expectant quiet of waiting for someone to come home, but a stillness that felt final. Tessa stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the soft shadows of afternoon light. and stared at the framed photographs that had lined the mantel for years. She picked them up one by one. Eli in his kindergarten costume, Eli holding his first soccer trophy, Eli at graduation with his forced, awkward smile. She didn't weep, she didn't tremble. She just wrapped them gently in soft towels and tucked them into a box marked Eli, keep safe. She left the balloons from spring break in the trash, the ones she'd blown up by hand that day, thinking he might still walk through the door like the boy she raised. Tessa didn't celebrate the court win. There were no drinks, no dinners, no sense of triumph. She came home, changed into her pajamas, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea she never finished. That night, the silence was heavier than the pain. But the next morning, she got up. She tied her hair back. She ironed her nurse's uniform and drove to a clinic that had better hours, better pay, and no memories attached. She accepted the offer she'd turned down 2 years ago because Eli didn't want her working too far from home. She said yes to Derek's dinner invitation. They ate at a quiet little place with cracked menus and good cornbread, and she laughed for the first time in weeks. A startled, shy sound that felt like it belonged to someone else. She started therapy too, sitting across from a kind woman named Lena, who didn't ask her to explain everything, only to try. 1 week turned into 2, then 4. She planted herbs on the windowsill, repainted the bathroom, signed up for a watercolor class at the library, even if her first painting looked like someone sneezed on the canvas. She didn't mention Eli anymore. Not to Derek, not to Lena, not to herself. Then, one rainy evening, she heard a knock. She opened the door to find Eli standing there, soaked through, hair flattened by the weather, a plain envelope in his hand. He didn't look like the confident young man who'd testified in court. He looked like a boy who wasn't sure if he was allowed to be there. She didn't speak, neither did he. He held out the envelope. She took it and stepped aside, but he didn't move to come in, just stood there as she opened it. Inside was a single handwritten note. I thought I wanted freedom, but I forgot who gave it to me. Her throat tightened. She looked up, her face unreadable. He didn't try to hug her, didn't cry, just stepped past the doorframe and sat down quietly on the couch. She sat next to him, slowly, like the weight of that act still meant something. There were no apologies spoken aloud, no grand reunion, just the two of them, sitting side by side, the same way they used to after dinner, back when life was simpler and trust came easily. Outside, the rain tapped softly on the windows, and for the first time in a long time, Tessa let herself just sit, not as Eli's caretaker, not as someone's anchor, just herself. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. The early morning sun filtered through the trees as Tessa walked the familiar path in the neighborhood park, her steps unhurried. The swing set was still there, rusted in places, the same creak in the chains she remembered. She paused near it, one hand lightly brushing the cool metal of the frame. Children's laughter echoed nearby. A young mother ran past her, chasing after her giggling little boy, arms wide like wings. Tessa turned slightly to watch them, eyes soft, not wistful, but knowing. Her voice came in, quiet and steady, a reflection rather than a declaration. Sometimes you raise someone so well, they think they did it themselves. And that's okay. That's the job. She stayed there for a moment, letting the scene live around her. The breeze played with the edge of her coat. The mother scooped up her child and spun him in a circle, both of them laughing, like the world was still good. Tessa smiled. Not the kind she gave when she was holding back tears, not the one she wore to get through hard shifts at work, but a quiet, earned smile, one that didn't need permission anymore. The weight she had carried for years, of motherhood without a title, of love given without thanks, it had eased, not gone completely. Some aches never leave, but she no longer felt defined by what was taken from her. She felt like herself again, and that, she realized, was more than enough. She turned from the swing, her footsteps steady, her shadow long behind her as she walked on, fade out. Hi besties, thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.